from experience-wise, I've gone through many distribution implementations. I'm talking like more than 100 at this point in my career. And there's a lot of common themes that I've seen in distribution environments that our technology really assists with, as you can imagine, right? So when we look at these key tips, what we're looking at obviously is more the finance and operations capabilities and what we can do then to optimize some of your distribution environment processes. So kind of with that, let's go through at a high level just to introduce what those tips are, because I think it's going to give you kind of some framing in terms of what content we're going to be going through here today. So first and foremost, the 11 key tips here, if we can start with obviously using the browser, right? So this is a one that I take for granted quite often, but it's a tip that I kind of added here as a freebie. So we actually have 12 key tips that we're going to be going through here today. We're going to talk about personalization. We're going to be talking about using tiles inside of your workspaces to optimize information so that you can quickly get to it in your distribution environments. You're not hunting, for example, for back orders inside of the system. We're going to cover, for example, Task Recorder, which is a very powerful tool that can help aid in your distribution processes. We're going to talk about why it's important to have a warehouse layout, how we use handhelds in the warehouse, what we should do for kitting by using production, for example, inside of finance and operations, how we maintain your assets, how we track some of the landed costs inside of your environment, how we use DDMRP and MRP, which you may or may not have heard, for recommendations for product capability and needs, how we use distributed order management, or what we call DOM, then for alignment, what you should be doing with Power BI, and then finally, how do you go beyond that, obviously, because maybe you want to add additional capabilities, for example, and you want to be able to tackle those inside of your environment. So these really are the key tips that we're going to go off of. And after I give each of these tips, what we're going to do is we're going to crack the software open. You're going to get to see it, and then I can kind of convey some of those concepts to you as we go through this discussion in a little bit more detail. So with that pitter patter, let's get at her. Let's go ahead and move into our next step. So browser search. This is one that I use all the time across any industry, across any product as well. But if you think about it, a lot of people are like, well, what's the benefit of this with a cloud app and a web browser and distribution? Like, what can I use with this? Well, first and foremost, if I kind of build this out at a high level, obviously we've got the browser that we interact with to be able to access then finance and operations or some of our products. And we're saying on F&O, but this is global, right? Basically, being able to find information quickly inside of a screen is a problem, right? Meaning I need to find where that field is or what value is here. Or in my menu, I've got so many different things to look at here. How do I find that information quickly and easily? And for distributors, like I said, we always focus on optimization, right? And speed so that we can get to that information very quickly and easily. So the browser search capabilities is a tip that I just want to kind of convey at a high level, which was the freebie here. And what I can do just really quickly here is kind of show that. So first and foremost, if I actually go into our browser search here and we go ahead and just really quickly open up our finance and operations environment, what you're going to see here is really the fact that I've got a menu here or a dashboard, right, that I interact with. And if I want to find, for example, purchase orders, what I can do in the browser is I can do Control F and then search for purchase, right? And what we're going to see here on the browser is it's going to find the text that really matches then that word that I'm looking for in this situation, which is purchase, for example. So I just kind of show this because remember, when you're using a cloud-based solution that uses a browser, you can set up these screens to actually be more accessible for you and faster to interact with and easier to find information. Examples of browser-based controls, zooming in. So I'm using Control plus Zoom to zoom in. So if you're doing a training for your distribution users, maybe you want to zoom into a workspace to interact with it. You can do things like full screen by hitting F11 then to make it so it feels like a full screen application that you're interacting with. You can do things such as print then, for example, something, or even then use shortcuts to then do customizations that are inside of here or personalizations inside of of here to be able to drive that. So I just wanted to kind of highlight kind of the most basic one to start here, which is within your browser, just remember all of these awesome capabilities that you have for printing, for finding, for sharing. You can also then use these such as bookmarks or multiple tabs. You should be using that inside of your environment, as you can imagine, then to really optimize your experience. So that's a big one, obviously, that you can tackle, and it's really, really worth it. Now, the other one that I want to kind of go through here is obviously the personalization perspective for a distributor. So it's not just the browser, it's also inside of the application. What can we do to make it easier then for you to see information quickly and then react to it, right? To be able to then address a particular need. So when we talk about personalizing dashboards, really what we're talking about is that very first screen that you see that pops. And basically what we want to do is we want to distinguish then areas that we interact with, so that way we can take advantage of that personalization to get our job done faster. So what do I mean by that? Let's go ahead and bring my browser back over here just really quickly. As you can see here, this is what we call our default dashboard. If you didn't know that, look up at the top here and you can see it says default dashboard, right? So in my dashboard, I've already gone through and personalized it, because by default in a dashboard, what you'll get are these tiles that are like this that do not then have additional details inside of that particular tile on the dashboard. So for example, what you can do is you can right click and personalize, for example, this particular screen, and then you can say personalize this page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to unhide then all the different workspaces I have inside of here. And what you can see, I've got a lot of them that I went through and actually hid as part of this. So the first thing is when you're going through a distribution environment for your role, you probably only want to have a couple of these workspaces that are in your dashboard to interact with. So the very first thing you're going to do typically when you're going through an implementation is basically refining which workspaces align then to the user role that you interact with. What's really cool about this then though, for example, let's pick on bank management. If I click on bank management and open up that workspace inside of here, what I can also do is take these tiles that are here, right click on them, personalize them, and then I can click on this pin to dashboard. And when you click on that particular action, that particular tile will now show up inside of here, so that instead of clicking into my bank accounts to click on my all bank accounts, instead of doing a two-step process to do that, now what I can do is just click on my all bank accounts. And of course, I clicked on statements inside of here, but I can access that information just immediately then from the dashboard. So this is a feature you should be using, you should be setting up and maintaining, and it's a really powerful capability. Now let's go a little bit further. Let's go into the tile section inside of Dynamics 365 here as well. So tile-wise, tiles are what we just saw inside of that bank management area. But what you can also do is you can create your own tiles. And this is a very powerful feature. And it's usually covered in our overview presentation when we're showing what the software can do. But what that means is really this. So as an example, if I click on my sales order processing and inquiry screen, I've got my tiles that are on the top here, and maybe I've got a process in place in my distribution environment where from my CRM system, I had a lead, it turned into an opportunity, and I won an account that became a customer. But when that customer comes over into the business system, I need to go through and verify and validate, for example, that that customer is maybe set up properly, which may include a workflow, or it could include a tile. And how could I do that? Well, what I could do here is I could click on, for example, my all customers, and I could make all the changes and personalization that I want inside of here. I could say, for example, I want to personalize this column, or I want to add new columns, or I want to personalize the page, and I don't want to have, for example, this commerce section inside of here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and hide it. And then what I want to do here is I only want to focus on, for example, level 1 customers, because maybe we're using a customer group that segregates that. So you can see now I have 2 different accounts that are inside of here. And then what I also want to do is that phone number is super critical, that I want it right after my name inside of here. Well, what I can do is I can take this, save this as, for example, my level 1 customers. and I can save this inside of here. But what I can also do then is in the options over here is I can take this and then add it to that working workspace. So as an example here, what I can do is I can say that this is going to go into our sales order processing and inquiry workspace, and I can represent it as a tile list or a link inside of here. I can click on that configure, and because this is an important tile, I want to make it big. I want it a 4x4 tile size. And you know what? I really don't need to know the count of customers, or maybe you do. I'll leave them on there to start. And then I want that view then to be defaulted inside of here. Well, here's the cool thing about it. If I close out of this now and then go back into my sales order processing and inquiry screen, what we're going to see is that that tile should show up inside of here for me to be able to interact with then. And I didn't click on the OK button, I think, to be able to do that, to be honest. But the net result here is that I can use then those tiles or even personalize these tiles to make them bigger or smaller, or to categorize or group that information inside of here as we go through that. So it's a really nice feature to basically go through and then add additional things into your view and then save those so that you can interact with them at the tile level as part of that process. All right, let's keep moving on, and we'll make sure we use Task Recorder to kind of highlight this as well. So the other feature that I like distributors to kind of focus on is the use of what we call a Task Recorder to basically go through and align, as we can see here, a business process inside of your system. So let's go ahead and just kind of show that really quickly here, because we're going fast and furious as we go through these features. So Task Recorder allows for me really to create a recording. So as an example, I could say that this recording is going to be a create customer recording, right? And what I can do is I can start this, and basically what I can do is I can go through the process that I would do to create that customer. I'd click on my sales order processing and inquiry. I'd go ahead and create, for example, or click on my all customers, and you can see basically it's tracking as I click on things to do that process. When I click on the new, it shows me here then that new fast pane that pops out, and then I can say, for example, that this is this customer number, and this is John Doe Inc. as an example, and then I can put them, for example, inside of maybe that level 1 customer inside of here as well. Finally, what I can do is I could save this away to then generate or create that customer. And if you had more fields that need to be populated, obviously you could record that as well as you go through the process. I think the key thing here, just to kind of note, is the fact that when I save this record and it actually creates then that particular customer, what we're going to see then is that as I close out of this, all of the actions that I've been doing are actually recorded inside of here. So I can actually take this task recording, save it now to my PC, or even export it as a Word document. And let's pretend like I'm a brand new user that's never used Dynamics, or I'm trying to train somebody on how to do a pick or how to do a pack operation and distribution. Well, what I can do is I can play that recording then as a guide. And what I can do just really quickly here is find that recording. And what I will then do, because it went into my downloads, I've got my create customer inside of here. I can open that task guide, start it, and then the system will direct me on every single area that I need to click on in order to do that action. So this tip, as you can imagine, can be beyond just distribution. But the cool thing about it is that it allows you then to take those processes and standardize them, and then provide training documentation that you can use in a sandbox environment, for example, to really optimize your business processes inside of the environment. So a really cool capability, and definitely something that we see a lot of distributors using, a lot of companies, in fact, using as part of that process. All right, let's keep rolling here. So create a warehouse layout. I don't have to demo this, but I can actually at least talk to the highlights inside of here. So first and foremost, you should set up a warehouse layout, like a visual warehouse layout that you draw and set up as part of your implementation process, meaning the building, the warehouse is on that building, and then inside of that warehouse, those specific locations where you can then hold inventory as part of that. Now, a couple of things I just want to kind of note here is that there's a concept inside of distribution environments with a warehouse layout where you've got aisles, you've got racks, you've got different heights of those racks as well. The one thing I just want to kind of highlight is the fact that the more locations you have, the more movements you'll have to do as you reconfigure your warehouse. So what you want to do is you want to be really smart about how you actually go through and then do that layout and then represent those aisles, those bins, what we call locations at a high level inside of Dynamics for that. And why do we want you to do that? Well, this is why. When we start thinking about staging, quarantine, bulk, picking locations that are a part of it, what we can do if you set up this and you visualize it, for example, inside of Power BI, is that we can identify heat maps that can then day by day potentially isolate, for example, product and inventory that is further away from the staging area, so that you can bring that closer then, for example, to pick locations that would be then satisfying that staging information or that staging area pick operation. So just as an example here, we've got one that for that product, D16, there's quite a bit of walk time that's there. And as we know in distribution, walk time is bad time. Well, in this situation, what that means then is we'd probably want to exchange that with D124, because that's an area right there that's getting less velocity, and we want more velocity basically into these pick locations as part of it. So I would highly recommend, obviously, to use the heat map creation, because it gives you such good insights into the picking activities inside of Dynamics, and it really allows you to align them what those needs are. All right, let's keep rolling here. So using mobility in the warehouse, I think this is, I don't know, in my opinion, this is paramount. If you're going to be using the advanced warehouse capabilities inside of Dynamics, you're going to want to use mobility. Handhelds, absolutely one of the best things that you can do to be able to do those operations. So let's just kind of go ahead and show that just really quickly here. So this is an example then of the handheld application inside of Dynamics 365. So kind of the cool things I can do here, I can manage multiple warehouses, as you can imagine, as I click on this change warehouse action inside of here, and it might have disconnected because I've had it open in the background, but I can interact with, for example, multiple warehouses. I can do some of these different types of activities then too. Just as an example, if I click on my outbound section here and I want the system to recommend what I should go pick, I can click on the sales picking, and then from there it can direct me where to go. And as you can see, I don't have anything to pick as part of that. Now, what's awesome about this application is that it resizes and scales based upon the device that you're using as well. So if you're going to use the symbol scanners, for example, you can use those with the long range capabilities then to use that to do your scanning operations. If you want to use the tablets that are on your arm, you can do that as well. If you want to use a tablet that's attached to a forklift that has a wedge scanner that you then scan different types of things, you can also do that. So this mobile app allows you to do a lot of those advanced functions, such as loading and picking and building of pallets and doing transfers, and even doing production and quality operations inside of the system. So once again, if you have finance and operations and you're looking to use handhelds, you should be using then the advanced warehouse capabilities in this advanced warehouse app then to be able to drive that, so you're not using a third-party scanner to be able to really tackle those capabilities. So mobility is absolutely key, as you can imagine, as well inside of an environment. All right, another area for this, kitting, right? Kitting is always so much fun. So my recommendation and my tip for you when you consider kitting, you've got a couple of options, right? In mine, I typically always go back to production for kitting. Now, a lot of people are like, Scott, production is way too heavy for kitting. It doesn't have to be. In production, there's a concept called forward flushing and back flushing, right? If you know production, it's a little bit different than distribution, but the cool thing about it is that typically a kit order needs to be generated. For example, if you have a sales order for a kit product that you sell, let's go into a make to order kit, right? Because there is the concept of a make to stock kit versus a make to order kit. So in a make to order kit, what the system needs to do is it needs to generate a document that really tells what composes of this kit, so that a person can go pick those items and then put them into a kit. Well, a production order is a perfect place for that, because what you can do is you can actually have production orders that you designate as a kit that can show up in a list that then an end user can interact with when they're doing their picking. So they can go pick kits and then bring them to the staging area by doing really that production process. And you can also then use the production for kitting to unify MTO and MTS, or make to stock scenarios as well, where, for example, you may want to have on hand a certain amount of a kit in a particular location. Well, let's generate a production order for that, because we're going to have to pick the product, we're going to have to build it in a workspace, and then we're going to put it back on the shelf as part of that. So that way, when we have a sales demand requirement or a transfer demand requirement for that kit, basically what will happen is that we'll allocate against that stock. And then if we hit safety stock or min-max levels, the system can even then generate, for example, additional production orders from MRP to do more kits to be able to satisfy that stock capability. So it can be as easy as this, right? So for example, in my modules here inside of production, so if I go into my production control, I can go into my production orders, right? And what I could do here is I could generate, for example, a new production order, and then I could specify what that kit item is going to be inside of here. So if I've got a bunch of different types of speakers or radios that we have, for example, inside of Dynamics here, what I can do is I can go ahead and then add, for example, that product, specify the different attributes that may be needed for it, the variants as we call it, as part of that. And then from here, what will happen is it will actually pull in this example, I don't even have a route or a work center, so I don't care about capacity. And what I could do is I could say, for example, I want to build 10 of those kits. And from here, what I can then do is even then specify, for example, a grouping with it, where I could say it's a production group 10 or even a pool. And as an example here, just really quickly, I could say this is my kitting pool that's inside of here as part of this, assign that pool to this production order, and then basically create it as part of that process. And what we're going to see here then is that I have a document that I can work with to be able to build out those kits. And like I showed in the personalization, what you would do is you would create a view, your kit view here, and I could save this as my kits, right, that I need to create, save that away, and now I can actually then add this as well to that workspace to then interact with it. And it can be as easy as this. I can actually come in here when I create this, I can estimate what it's going to do to create the pick information for it, and I could go grab that product, I have it print out, I could have it come onto my handheld scanner as well, and then finally what I could do is I could actually report it as finished, and when I did that, it would consume all the product and then post all the output with it, so I can say, yeah, I built 10 kits as part of this process, and then that inventory would be reflected. So really in 3 clicks, I was able to basically manage a kit very quickly and easily inside of the system, and I don't need to have, for example, a different like kit order or anything else like that in the system to be able to drive it. So a really nice feature, a really nice capability, and like I said, it doesn't have to be complex production. It can just be as simple as basically just a BOM that I put on my product so that when I pull for that pick, it's going to know exactly what items I need to go grab based upon that bill of materials. And you could simplify this even more. Just as an example, I just want to kind of highlight this. It's just endless what you can do here. I don't care about schedule in kits, so I'm going to hide my schedule. I don't care about costing in my kits. I'm going to hide that, right? And so I could create a really simplistic view then for end users to interact with for my kits. So that way then when I go back to my regular orders, I have all that great information, but when I go back to my kits, it hides what I don't need as part of that when I go through the process. So a really nice feature in that regard to be able to drive that. All right, let's keep rolling here. Asset maintenance, I do want to highlight this. So distributors, how frustrating is it when a forklift breaks down, right? So downtime equals bad time for distributors. Using our EAM, so Enterprise Asset Management is what we call it, but just note that other companies that are in this space will call it CMMS, right? So there's just different terms that we use then. Computerized computerized maintenance management system, right, is CMMS. EAM is Enterprise Asset Management. High level, we want to make sure we set up our products so that we can then, or our assets, so we can at least service them as we go through that process. And once again, that's another native feature that you should be using inside of Dynamics. So just as an example here, if I go into my asset management workspace and I look at my asset view here, this is where I can set up, for example, in our demo environment, USMF is a manufacturing location, but it still does distribution. We're still distributing plastic parts that are then shipped to other warehouses that are then fulfilled as part of that. But what I can do is I can set up the plant or the distribution warehouse. I can set up the different areas inside of here. And then what I can do is I can set up, for example, the different assets that are then related to that particular area. So if you have an automated picking machine, for example, that needs to have maintenance every now and then, you could set that up as an asset, set up a preventative maintenance plan, and then work orders will be generated to do inspections and then repairs and preventative maintenance then against those given assets. And the cool thing about this is that you can also then use mobile apps to then do things like break fix scenarios. And you can basically use the asset management, as you can see here, as we go to work orders, to take those work orders and then manage them throughout the process by then recording, for example, that time. As you can see here, we've got a generator for our building that we've got some weekly preventative maintenance that we do. And if I click on, for example, that work order, I can see where it's at, what the asset location is for it, what trade is needed for it. And then from there, what I can do is I could even create like purchases or production orders. Like, for example, let's say I've got a machine that doesn't have a spare part related to it that I can buy, but I can manufacture it at some level. Well, I could create a production order basically to go through and then drive that. So a really cool capability that I think every distributor should be using at a minimum to basically maintain some of the forklifts and some of those types of activities that you would have inside of your distribution environment. And it can go further. Conveyor systems, right? Some of those types for small parcel products, for example, can also be set up to be scheduled for it so that you can then set up those preventative maintenance scenarios to really then support the business inside of your environment. So a really nice feature in that regard as part of that. All right, let's keep rolling here. We got a couple more slides to get through. Tracking landed costs. So distribution, obviously, from a landed cost perspective, this is a big gotcha for a lot of distributors, especially in the high volume, low margin, right? So landed costs inside of Dynamics really focus on aligning a vessel, a voyage, and then the steps that it needs to go through to really go through and then satisfy or fulfill that product. But it doesn't stop there. There's also cost, right? Because you've got port fees, for example. You've got different types of exchanges that may be occurring with it. You've got tariffs that are involved inside of this. You've got adjustment fees, like the bunker adjustment fees that may be happening. So landed costs, those costs can have a tangible impact on the profitability of your product, especially when you're starting to look at high volume, low margin types of products. So inside of Dynamics, lo and behold, right, for distributors, we do have the ability to basically manage those landed costs. So just to kind of crack that open at a high level, just as an example here, if I click on my landed costs inside of here, I can see, for example, different types of voyages that we may have already set up inside of our environment to go through and deliver a particular product. And what I can do here, instead of using Excel to do this, is that, for example, I can see the shipping containers that are then related to that particular vessel. And inside of that container, I can see what purchase orders are actually associated with that. And there's some really cool things that we can then do with this, because from a distribution perspective on the finance side, most of us know then that when you actually have product that you buy overseas that then gets shipped over on a vessel, that typically you take ownership of that when it actually hits, for example, the water. And at that point, we call that goods in transit, right, on the balance sheet, because we have to represent that we own that asset. but it's still not at our facility or at our warehouse that we can use to fulfill it. So the cool thing about this is that we can align the vessel, the container, the purchase orders, or even technically the transfers that we have maybe from overseas. And what we can also do then is take a look at, for example, the different types of costs that are related to it. So that way, for example, if we're looking at these different costs that are involved in this conversation, on our voyage costs as an example inside of here, we can see when we receive these items then for this product on that purchase order that there's going to be an additional 10% cost that's added then for a bunker adjustment fee to that product in mass. So that way, when we do our cost versus revenue to figure out our profitability, we're including not only the purchase prices, but the additional voyage costs that are there. And the cool thing about this is that you can do manual costs if you want to by putting in, for example, a cost type. You can apportion it differently based upon quantity or volume, or you can define your own measurement for it. So it really makes it a lot easier then to basically track, obviously, where this is at inside of that process, and then what those costs are going to be in additional. And then, as well as you can imagine, you got to pay your vendors or your tariffs for that. Well, you can also use that capability as well to then generate the AP event that you then pay out for that given product. So really, really cool in that regard, and a really nice feature from a landed cost perspective. All right, let's go into MRP really quickly here. So I bring this up because a lot of customers, when they hear MRP, they're like, oh, we're not a manufacturer. This isn't manufacturing requirements planning. This is materials requirement planning. And distributors can also use MRP and should, in my opinion, use MRP. So what MRP does is it looks at the demand requirements. It looks at, for example, your forecast that you uploaded. It looks at the sales orders that are inside of the system. And what it's doing is it's trying to make a recommendation on how we fulfill that supply requirement. So obviously, then, if you've got a lot of distribution orders that are coming through from an MRP perspective, you want to know what you're short on so that you can then order product hopefully far enough ahead of time as well to be able to satisfy that demand requirement. And once again, for distributors, there are some distributors that are becoming more manufacturers, or manufacturers that are becoming distributors as well because they want to own the supply chain perspective as they go through that process. Well, the cool thing about this is that it can actually help you with that multi-step scenario as well, where you receive to a DC and then you spread out, for example, that product or transfer it to regional DCs then from a central DC to a regional DC concept. So that way then you can have product that is closer to the customer so that you can then fulfill that. The example I love to use with it, I used to work at Best Buy. Best Buy, their stores are fantastic regional distribution centers where I can buy product typically from Best Buy cheaper for the same type of product than I can by ordering it from Amazon, because they may or may not have a distribution hub in that area to be able to then deliver that product, as an example. So this concept then of distributors using stores or DCs as well really kind of plays into that. Now, DDMRP is another concept inside of here. So what I just want to kind of highlight here is from a master planning perspective. If I look at, for example, master planning inside of here, so as you can see, I can't find the master planning. If I type in master planning, boom, pops up. I can see it. That's that feature I talked about, that search. Click on my master planning inside of here. And what I can do inside of here is look at the planned orders, and the system will actually tell me then what I should be purchasing to satisfy the demand requirement. How can I see that? Well, basically what I can do is I can come into this view and I can say, I want to look at all my purchase orders. And here's an example then of a speaker kit that I should be ordering. And the reason I should be ordering it is because on the far right here, it says that I don't have enough safety stock of this, right? And in this example, this one is saying, we're using this in some type of production process, for example. And in this example, for this metal grill, we're doing the same thing for it, right? So the cool thing about this is that it's actually showing you then what the demand requirement is and why you should be ordering it, so that you can then take this and then just automatically take this particular order and then firm it to then generate a purchase order inside of the system. And here's the great thing about it. You can actually override the system by saying, you know what, I want to change that to a transfer because I have another DC that has this. Change it to a transfer order, so I supply that then from that given DC to the other place or other location or warehouse to fulfill then that product quantity. So a fantastic capability inside of here to be able to drive that. And then finally, just to kind of go double down on the DDMRP concept, demand driven allows us to then obviously use demand capabilities, meaning vendor performance, to basically then identify, as you can imagine, which vendors and what the realistic dates are for delivery as we go through that process. So great, let's keep going here. Another tip, distributed order management. If you're not using DOM for fulfillment and distribution, you probably should take a look at it. Distributed order management in Dynamics is a commerce concept, but it helps distributors so much that don't need retail stores, for example. It's all about taking, for example, an order and then identifying how you can fulfill that order inside of Dynamics. So let's go ahead and just kind of show that really quickly here. I'm going to go ahead and bring my screen back up here for this. I'm going to go into my retail company because I've got some data that's set up inside of here to be able to drive that. Now, inside of Dynamics, if you look inside of our workspaces, we have a concept called distributed order management that's inside of here. And the cool thing about this is that we can see, for example, the different types of open orders and lines and what that fulfillment would be to be able to drive that. And if I go down a little bit further here, what I can do is I can define what are called profiles that basically say, hey, how do I want the system to figure out when I have an order come through e-commerce, or if I manually enter an order, how do I fulfill that order? Because an example would be if I have a product quantity of 100 and in this warehouse I only have 50, I don't want to have the sales team member looking through all the warehouses and building out a sales order that has 10 lines on it to do the fulfillment. I want to put some rules in place that say, hey, if it's a partial order, split it across these warehouses. If the distance between the DC or the warehouse or the store and also then the consumer is X amount of miles, I don't want you to use then that store or that distribution center to fulfill that, for example. Or if the cost of fulfillment exceeds a certain value, I don't want to use that cost as part of it. So these fulfillment profiles allow for us then, if I just go really quickly to a sales order just to kind of show, allow for us then to have a sales order that comes into the system. I pre-created this earlier, this Mara Gentry inside of here. And what the system will do then is it'll actually go through, and if I look at my DOM processing inside of here, so we'll view our DOM processing log on this, we can see then that the system saw, hey, here's the fulfillment rule. I've got a quantity of 20 that needs to be fulfilled with it. Let's fulfill it from New York as part of this because that's the closest to that customer for that fulfillment profile. So you don't even need to know what warehouses you're stocking from it. You can use DOM then to do that alignment as part of that process. So a great capability basically to drive then, as you can imagine, the selection of the warehouse for those capabilities. All right, let's keep rolling because we got a couple more tips that I want to get through. This is action-packed, and if you've got questions, put them in there because what we'll probably have to do is follow up with it. High level, though, using Power BI. So if you are not using Power BI for your metrics and reporting, you're missing out on a lot of content that you could be using inside of your distribution environment. So more specifically here, obviously Power BI is the platform that we use to represent, for example, some of these metrics that we record. But the cool thing about this is that distributors can create their own Power BI reports that snap natively into Dynamics as well. So I like, when I do a distribution environment implementation, I like to have performance metrics that's a Power BI report that refreshes, that we put on a big screen TV to show leaderboards, to make it a little bit more fun when we're doing our picking operations, to see who's doing great, who needs some help, or what big orders are coming down the pike, right, to be able to tackle that. Now, one of the features that we have inside of Dynamics, so if I go, for example, into warehouse management here as an example, and I bring us all the way over to these reports, we've got a lot of great picking lists and reports that we can interact with then to basically then show additional history or additional value inside of here as part of that. So you can see that we've got, for example, all these different types of reports. But what we can also do is we can actually use, for example, the warehouse performance analysis or analytics to basically then use Power BI to I don't know, get into some more details then about our warehouse performance. Pick performance, because as we're doing picking activities, we are actually recording basically those activities that we're doing when we're doing those processes. So you're going to see it pop up in the background here, but as you can see, we've got shipping performance. Well, we've shipped by customer, shipments over time, how many have been late, how many are early. I can filter down this data even further as part of this to get to those details. And inside of here, for example, I can get rid of my month offset and get even additional details that are related to it. We can look at our location inventory accuracy. We can look at our cycle times that are related to it. So there's just a lot of great detail inside of here that we can use to really drive some of those performance metrics. And if you're using Power BI to be able to do it, well, you're able to then do some more analysis, as you can imagine, of that to be able to drive that. And there's even some additional preview features, as you can see, like, for example, the warehouse material movement analysis that are being added that allow for us then to take that data and then identify what process you've used to basically go through and then show some of that visualization inside of the environment. So a really great feature in that regard. All right, let's get to the last one inside of here because we're kind of at time. Power Platform to extend. So it's not uncommon for distributors to want to add additional capabilities really to the solution, right? And instead of paying for a partner to do it, what you can do is you can actually use then the Power Platform to extend those capabilities inside of finance and operations. So what do I mean by that? So let's go, common example, let's go to our sales orders. Let's go and let's say, for example, in my options here, what I want to do is I want to create a flow. So we're going to see a tab pop out inside of here. And what I can do is I can then use the Power Platform to go through and then create, for example, sign in with a different account here and make sure I'm using the right account. Yep. But what I can do then is I can basically use Power Automate to do things like on a sales order, maybe I actually want to have a delivery notification that gets generated when the order status changes to some value, right? So you can see here, we've got a couple of different templates. Send an email when a business event occurs inside of Dynamics 365. So I could say, yep, I want to go ahead and use that. And it's going to have me sign in with all the different login information that's here. And what I would be able to do then is basically then build out and automate where when a particular event happens, so I can come in here and say, in our environment, when we ship an item or when we have something occur, you'll see there's a bunch of different options that are inside of here. But as a sales order, as an example, if I see the different events, when an invoice is created, I could then send an email to somebody saying you've had an invoice. And we can add additional events, and you can even snap into what we call alerts to then extend that even further. But you can see here, you've got some nice templates that you can use as you go through this. And if you want to use Copilot to help you build that out even further, you can also use that capability as well.